And we thank the Silent Juice Bar owner for the use of his premises here today. And we're delighted with that. We're here to talk about Windrush. We all know about what the Windrush issues are, and we all know about the dreadful impact that it's had upon our families. And we've got lots of special guests here today. But I'm going to start off, as you would expect me to, with some lawyers who understand the issue from a technical perspective. And first up, to join me, is Peter Herbert, who's Peter Herbert OBE, Chair of the Society of Black Law. Give him a round of applause. Those things don't come easy. You know a brother's had to work hard to be a radical black lawyer and a judge.
I am not here speaking in any judicial capacity. It's only as Chair of the Society of Black Lawyers and an activist. So forget all the rest, no titles, no anything, just me Peter. As an activist. Thank you. Right. So, I mean, the conversation about this, speaking to immigration lawyers, happened several years ago. It happened actually in 1971, in 2001, in 1971, in 1973. And basically, gradually, the rights of Commonwealth citizens were eroded over a period of time. It's nothing new, but it's happened incrementally. But the biggest change came in 2014, where they removed the right for Commonwealth citizens to be able to prove just by 5 years residence that they were actually UK citizens. Back in 1971, they had a couple of years, I can't remember the exact dates, but a couple of years where they had a window of opportunity to apply for UK citizenship. And as a brother said in the Black Cultural Archive the other day, he said there were 3 categories of people that he talked to since. One category, they'd done it. They'd got their citizenship, got that passport, red, blue, or pink, or whatever it was, and were okay. The second group said, we're doing it. They may or may not have been doing it because it was quite costly. And the third group just didn't bother because all sorts of personal reasons are either expensive, or because they didn't think they had to, or because it'll be done tomorrow. The problem is that in 2014, and probably from 2010, this government adopted what was called a hostile environment. And you've heard that phrase many times. What it means is that the Conservative government actually was being pushed to the right, not very difficult for some of them, by UKIP, by Nigel Farage and others. And what they did, they made a numbers game out of immigration. And it's always been a numbers game. Remember that 100,000 target? Well, you're all part of that target, because you cannot achieve that target without going for easy targets. And so the easy targets were not EU citizens, because actually they're very hard because they're here. It was low-hanging fruit, as they themselves called, which is an unfortunate term at the best of times. It was African and Asian people from the Commonwealth. Not, by the way, from the new Commonwealth, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, because they had what's called grandparents' rights. So still, if their grandparents were born here, then they could claim citizenship. They could go through a process, and they would not be kicked out anywhere. In court, as a practitioner, you will look long and hard ever to come across an Australian, a New Zealander, a Canadian, possibly in 30 years of practicing as an immigration lawyer, possibly one Australian, possibly two Americans, one of whom was mad, and one Canadian, all of whom actually were allowed to remain. I think the American had broken quite a few laws and was eventually deported. But it was not designed for them. They had special privilege, white privilege if you like. But with UKIP, one of the consequences of everybody dressed to the right, Labour Party dressed to the right, Tory Party dressed to the right, Liberal Democrats went the same way, more or less. So therefore, the hostile environment policy was not an accident. You heard Amber Rudd and people say it was an oversight. It was somehow unintentional. Rubbish. It was deliberate to meet their targets of having 100,000 people removed every year, 100,000 limit. And in that, there was a target for removals. So when Amber Rudd said that there are no targets, and a civil servant had said a few minutes before there weren't local and national targets, it was a lie. We strongly suspect that every cabinet meeting, virtually since 2014 at least, there was a discussion of immigration targets, whether the overall target of trying to get numbers coming in down to 100,000. You know, and there's always people who leave. There's Britons all over the world, in France, in Germany, in Spain, a lot of criminals down there, escaped from the UK. And they are there, but more people come in. And they generally come in, either from the EU or around the world, for work. People generally do not come around to get benefit. Actually, you can get more benefits in France or Spain or Germany than you can here, but that was the lie that was told. People are coming to take benefits, get free NHS treatment, take our jobs, take our house. You know, you've heard the same old story. So as far as that is concerned, the issue arose because not only did they open the door to the deportation, administrative removal of Commonwealth citizens who previously had a right of abode and who hadn't got their papers in order, which was around about 60,000, we think, around about 60,000 people. And their descendants, some of whom the children didn't know they didn't have status. The first they heard about it was when they went to try to get into college or university. And were told, I'm sorry, produce your passport. And they thought, because their parents may not have told them, that actually they didn't have that citizenship that they'd been told they had. So there's a generational problem. And it is partly as a result of things we did not do as a community. And there's some responsibility. But nevertheless, it's the only group of people, and there's white people who don't do this either. We're not unique in that. And the communities are often elderly, often living in poverty, often living sometimes in the margins of society. And yes, they may not have been easy to reach. But if the government wanted to, it could have said, you know what, you've got the right of abode, no problem. You're excluded from this. But they didn't. And the reason they didn't is they actually thought, well, you know what, let's get rid of them anyway. Maybe nobody will notice. And for actually several years, nobody did really notice. We just thought it was part of the normal immigration process. And yes, you'd get the odd person. I had one person I was representing who was a 54-year-old man from Barbados. He'd come here when he was 5. He'd had a good character all his life, but at one point when I think he was about 48, he'd had a possession conviction with intent to supply cannabis and got 12 months imprisonment. That rendered him liable to automatic deportation, where if you've had a criminal conviction and you've been sentenced to imprisonment of 12 months or more, you can automatically be deported unless there is exceptional circumstances, which means that deportation should not happen. So he faced a hearing where the Home Office were applying for him to be removed. He served his sentence, I think 6 years previously, no further convictions. He had a wife, he had 3 children, 2 of whom were adults. He had grandchildren. His whole life was been here. In fact, he couldn't even remember how long he'd been here. He had to go back and get his medical records. He had to go back to the primary school in Shepherd's Bush. He had to go to every sort of record he could. And the Home Office said, well, all right, you've proved that you were here possibly in 1964 to 68. But how do we know you didn't go home between 1968 and 1978? Nonsense. The man never left. But they wished him to prove every single year of those 54 years. And so, you know, the decision was made that this is ridiculous. There were completely exceptional circumstances. These deportations were not designed for people with the right of abode. They were designed for so-called foreign criminals. But by changing the definition, he fell into the category of a foreign criminal because he didn't have his citizenship. So therefore, the environment was created was completely hostile. And in fact, EU citizens, and it's not a competition about who has more rights, because I don't have a problem with a Romanian or a Pole or a Lithuanian having citizenship rights and freedom of movement as an EU citizen. They're not my problem. My problem is the UK government and its racism, xenophobia and hostility against Commonwealth and Windrush generation citizens. And that is a major issue. If you have been unable to access college or university because your papers weren't in order, you are entitled to significant amounts of compensation. So do not sign anything away without your lawyer actually authorizing you agreeing to anything. And you are entitled to significant amounts of compensation.
If I may, Connie, you're with us. You're a fabulous, high-flying legal advocate for the community. And your specialism is judicial review, I believe.
Yes.
And I think there'll probably plenty of work coming your way in relation to judicial reviews. Just reinforce for us that importance of getting the right legal advice and the realities of the Windrush deportations.
I think it's important that people have advice about practical steps that they can take. So when Peter said that when you get indefinite leave to remain, you should refuse it, then I agree with that. You should refuse it, but in terms of the pragmatic steps, when you refuse it, you should refuse it with the advice of your lawyer. Speak to your lawyer
First.
Get advice on what the implications are of you refusing it. When you get indefinite leave to remain, you're not going to get a right of appeal against that decision, so that, because it's, as far as the Home Office is concerned, that is a proper grant of stay. They think you're going to be satisfied with it. There's not going to be a right of appeal. So the only way that you're going to be able to refuse it is possibly by applying for judicial review and saying that this decision is not right.
So you would challenge, just to be clear for our others, what you're saying is there is an opportunity that should you be offered indefinite leave to remain, that your lawyer could judicially review the decision.
Yes.
And that would act as your refusal, if you like, or resistance to that decision.
Yes, but of course every case must be considered on its own merits. So you must sit down with your lawyer. They must go through why the decision, go through the decision with you. If the decision is wrong, if it's challengeable, and if it is, it's going to be by judicial review. And that must be done within 3 months of the decision. So there might be people here who are sitting here who were granted maybe indefinite leave to remain 6 months ago, in which case you're probably out of time for judicial review, and in which case you can still go to your lawyer, see whether you can make representations and say that I think that I should be granted, I should have been recognized as a British citizen on the following basis, and then see what the Home Office say in response to that letter.
Okay.
But please take action. Those are the practical steps that you must take. Now, and make sure that you go to lawyers who can assess you for legal aid.
We're going to put some lawyers' numbers up and free legal aid clinics numbers up in a little while, so that people around the country can find out where to ring their locality.
Yes. So for my understanding of the situation is many of the community who've been affected by this are people who might not have been working for a long time, haven't had access to benefits. So these are people who are likely to be eligible for legal aid. But you must, when you go to and see a lawyer, make sure you ask whether you're eligible for legal aid. They'll assess you, and if you are, then they should be giving you legal aid to advise you. So that's in relation to the practical steps with the judicial review. In relation to the compensation, Peter mentioned that. Again, it's important to get a lawyer, a good lawyer, reputable lawyer who's does
compensation.
Does
because
compensation.
People are going to be interested in this point. Because it seems to me that the government made a carte blanche statement that people will get compensated.
Yes.
But compensated for what? And to what particular standard? I can compensate you for breaking your foot by giving you 10p. That might be my compensation. But what I worry about is that people who don't know how to calculate their losses may go in and say, well, I just want this or I just want that, not realizing that they lost their job and their home, and plus the emotional stress and the mental distress that has caused people is all perfectly compensatable, isn't it?
That's correct. And so that's why you must go to a lawyer who does compensation claims, so that they can go through.
And they are specialists.
Yes. So the firm that I work for, we do compensation claims.
Mention them, we're not on TV here.
I work for a firm called Dighton Pierce Glynn Solicitors. It's in London Bridge. We've got an office in City Road and another office in Bristol. And what we do is mainly represent people in judicial review claims, which include damages claims. So for example, those people who might still be in detention, who are challenging the legality of the detention, we deal with those cases where we argue about the detention, and also say that if the court is defined that the detention is unlawful, that those people should be granted damages, should be awarded damages. Now, for the Windrush people, if it, as far as I understand, there might not be many people in detention or any people left in detention. I don't know.
Who told you that?
I don't know. I know that 2 weeks ago. There were some ladies who were released. I think the Channel 4 covered some Windrush.
From Yarlswood?
Yes.
Yes.
So I don't know how many more are left. I think because of the publicity, the Home Office might be seeking to release.
Release lots.
Yes. So for those people who have been released, I think they need to speak to lawyers and see whether they can bring claims for false imprisonment. Because if the argument is that we have had right of abode since 1971 or 1981, or we're British citizens, then the argument will be you have detained us and yet we were British citizens. And if you have done that, then we're entitled to damages.
That's right.
For that. Those people who've been denied treatment, NHS treatment, free medical treatment, which they should get. If they've got the right of abode or indefinite leave to remain, they're entitled to free healthcare, especially those people who've been working all their lives and paying taxes. Why should they get that? So I guess you get advice from lawyers who do that kind of work for denial of healthcare for those people who've lost jobs because employers have been told we're going to fine you.
Is that different lawyers for different aspects of your claim? Or can one lawyer cover health, employment, loss of housing?
I guess if they have the special expertise to deal with those issues, then it should be one lawyer who covers all those things. Because the argument will be, because of this Home Office decision, I have suffered all these ills.
Yes.
So it's one decision and all these issues. So
absolutely.
when I deal with detention cases, I say that for example, I was a few months ago, I was dealing with EU rough sleepers who were detained. And so the argument was, if you've detained people and they haven't been able to work because they've got the right as EU citizens or nationals to work and to do all these things, by detaining them, you've denied them their EU citizen free movement rights, you've denied them their right to work, to look for work, so all those things. So we were able to argue not just detention, but all those other rights, associated rights. So as British citizens, we'll say we're nationals, and as citizens, all these other rights, we have all these other associated rights. So
this is a hellishly complex area for common people to understand. I mean, I consider myself a fairly educated man, not in super soul. Better people with brains in the room than me. But I can't understand the various applications of both the immigration legislation and the compensation law that dictates that. So I can only imagine the difficulty of somebody, out there in the community thinking, well, how do I go forward? And it's predicated all on really getting the right legal advice from the very start.
Yes.
And doing that. And what is your firm name again?
Dighton Pearce Glynn.
Dighton Pearce Glynn. And you do judicial reviews.
Judicial review.
So if anybody wanted to judicially review a Home Office decision in relation to them about their passport, their indefinite leave to remain, their biometric card or whatever, you'd be the person to come and see. Your firm would be a person people to come and see.
That's correct.